Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so we're going to start 112b. We're going to start from the Mishnah that's in the middle of the Mishnah. It says, Ad shleihu kama Mishkan. Until the Mishkan was set up. See, it's in the middle of the page. It says, yeah?
What is it?
Until the Mishkan was established, until the Mishkan was set up. It's sort of like a division in the Mishnah.
Yeah.
It says, until the Mishkan was set up, hayu abamis mutares. This is the tabernacle in the desert. They could have brought sacrifices on private altars. Abama means a private altar. Once the Mishkan was set up, then things are going to change slightly. So it was permissible to bring a sacrifice on private altars. Va'aveda v'b'chayras. Who did the service? Would be the firstborns. They were considered the Kohanim back then. Umishu hukam Mishkan. However, once the Mishkan was set up, nesru habamais. The bamais, the private altars, became forbidden. It means all sacrifices now need to go to the Mishkan. And va'aveda b'kayanim. And now the Kohanim take over as the priests. Kodshei kadashim nechalim l'fnim min haklam. At that point, now there was a Mishkan. So
the Mishkan was set up pretty soon after
the Jews left.
So it was only a little while.
It's about
it
was a year. Minus 15 days. But I believe this is referring to those that were keeping Judaism even before they left Egypt. Avram, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Noach maybe. They had private altars.
Okay.
Or maybe it's only referring to that. It's unclear. So, but there was an understanding back then in the time of the patriarchs that the firstborns were the ones that would do the service. That's all the fight's about. So once the Mishkan was set up, then the holy sacrifices needed to be eaten within the enclosure. V'kodshim kalam b'chol machne Yisrael, and of secondary holiness that would be allowed to be eaten anywhere in the Jewish camp. Bo leGilgal, this is the first stop once they came into the land of Israel. Hutru habamis. They were then allowed to, because they didn't set up a permanent Mishkan yet, so they were allowed to use private altars. What would happen then? So Kodshei Kadashim Nechalim L'fnim min haklam, the Holy of Holies, the special sacrifices, they had to be eaten within the enclosure. What is the enclosure? What it means is that these sacrifices were actually brought to the Mishkan in Gilgal. And it was all other sacrifices that did not need to be brought to the Mishkan. Kodshei Kadashim were not brought on a private altar, because the only thing that could be brought on a private altar were donations, and the Kodshei Kadashim were sin offerings and guilt offerings and communal offerings. So those actually had an enclosure. So the problem is there's no enclosure by a private altar. That's Kodshim Kalim, of secondary holiness, b'chol makom. They were allowed to be eaten anywhere in the land of Israel.
Does that mean also be bound with the Mizbech anywhere?
Yeah, any Mizbech, because it was Hutra Abamis, any altar. Bo l'Shilai. This is when the Mishkan in Shiloh was already established. This means that they already divided up the land of Israel. Nesru Abamis. Then it became forbidden to use private altars. V'lo hayasham tikra. The Shiloh did not have a roof. Ela beis avanim bilvad. The house was made of stone, milmatan, from below. It means the walls were made of stone. And v'hayiriyas milmailam, but the top of it was sort of like a tent. it was the coverings that they used in the tabernacle. They then spread them over this actual structure. V'hi haisa menucha. This is what the pasuk says, that until you come to your to your resting and to your inheritance, you're allowed to use private altars. This is when they came to the resting. This is the first step of the forbiddenness, being forbidden to use private altars. And what would happen then when they're in Shiloh? The holy sacrifices, they were eaten within the enclosure in Shiloh. However, Kachim Kalim and Meiser Sheni B'chol Araya. Kachim Kalim and Meiser Sheni, they were allowed to eat, and anywhere around that area that could be seen from Shiloh. Bo L'Noivi Givon, after the ark was captured with the war with the Philistines, so it was basically the end of the Mishkan in Shiloh. So they moved the center to Nov and then to Givon. And at that point, Hutru Abamis, because he didn't have a real tabernacle then, a real temple, so they were allowed to use private altars again. So it's like going back and forth here. It's forbidden, it's not forbidden, it depends on which era. Holy sacrifices had to be brought to Noiv or Givon, and they were eaten within the enclosure. However, the lesser of holiness, they were allowed to be eaten anywhere in Israel, and they're brought on any altar. But Yerushalayim, this is already when they built the temple. Nesra Bamis Vleilam Heter. There was never another. Never becomes permissible again to use a private altar. Bihi Haisa Nachla, and that's what the verse says, that you will come to your resting, and until your inheritance, that's the inheritance. And from then on, there's never going to be a permissibility to use a private altar. Kodshi Kadashim, at that point, the Holy of Holy Sacrifice and Nechalim Lifnim and Aklam have to be eaten within the enclosure, which means the walls of the Azara. And Kodshim Kalim of secondary holiness, Meiser Sheni, and also the second tithe that's brought to Jerusalem. Where was that eaten? Lifnim and Achayma, within the walls of Jerusalem. Kala Kadashim Shekdishim B'Shas Yisr. This is interesting. If something was sanctified at the time when private altars were forbidden, V'Krivim B'Shas Yisr Mibachutz, and they were brought outside at the time that it was forbidden. So it was sanctified when it was forbidden, it was brought when it was forbidden. So person did everything wrong. So he violated a positive command that they should be brought to the temple. He violated a negative command that says that you should not bring it outside lest you bring it outside the temple. And that includes also kares, where it says v'nichrasu, it says that the person's soul is cut off. Hekdeisham b'shas heter bamis. Let's say he sanctified this animal at the time when it was allowed to bring it outside. It was within, like in between, when the Mishkan was in Nov or in Givon. V'krivim b'shas yisr bamis. But then he went and brought it after the temple was built already, so then it was forbidden. Bachutz, outside the temple. It was supposed to be in the temple. He brought it out on a private altar. So harei elabas say, v'loisa say vein chayav alem kares. This would not include the kares punishment. So the Gemara is going to explain why exactly. Actually, the Gemara explained this before. We have the verse that talks about this excludes something, and we said it's excluding if it was sanctified at a time that it was appropriate to be brought outside the temple, and then it was brought at a time that it was not appropriate to be brought outside the temple, so then there's no kares by then. Ikdeishan b'shas yisr b'mayis, let's say it was the opposite. It was sanctified at a time that it was forbidden to bring it outside the temple, because Shiloh was around, let's say. V'krivim b'shas heter abamis. But then they brought the sacrifice after Shiloh was destroyed. Hari elabasei, then he's violating a positive command. He's neglecting a positive command, because when he sanctified it, he should have been bringing it to the temple. But there is no negative command, because he really didn't do anything wrong. He just neglected the positive command of bringing it to the temple. but there was no prohibition because it was a time that private altars were allowed. Ve'elu kadashim kreiven b'mishkan. The following sacrifices were brought in the Mishkan. Kachim shuk tishul Mishkan. Sacrifices that were sanctified to be brought in the Mishkan. In other words, even if you were allowed to bring it on a private altar, these following sacrifices needed to be brought in the public altar in the tabernacle itself, because you couldn't do everything on your own. If it was sanctified to go to the Mishkan, karbanos tzibur, public sacrifices were only brought in the community altar, not on the private altars. Kreiven b'mishkan, karbanos hayachid. However, personal sacrifices, that was brought b'bama. Karbanos yachid shuk tishul Mishkan. If it was personal sacrifices that were sanctified to be brought in the Mishkan, so yakrivu b'mishkan. What's that? Ches? Yakrivu. They're brought in the Mishkan. V'mekrivim b'bama, but if they were brought on the private altar, they were allowed to be, but they weren't sanctified for that purpose. He's pater. He's exempt. There's no punishment there. What's going to be the difference between a private altar and a public altar? The difference is smicha. Do you lean on the sacrifice before it's brought? Shchitas tzafin doesn't need to be sacrificed on the north. Matan saviv, does the blood need to be put on the two corners, catty corners, so it's considered that it's on all four sides? Utenufa v'hagasha, certain sacrifices or certain offerings needed to be waved, to wave it to the six directions. That was done only on public altars. Rabbi Yehuda, Omer, Ein mincha bebama. Yehuda says that there's no such thing as a carbon mincha on a bama. The kihon, the next thing that would be a difference between the public altar and a private altar is if a kohen does it or a non-kohen, because only on public altars you needed a kohen. Ubig de sharis, he needed to be wearing his special clothing if it was a public altar. Klei sharis, needed to have the special utensils. V'reach nichayach, and also there's a special law that you weren't supposed to put on the altar something that was already roasted to be burnt, because it needed to have the smell of roasting, which that's only on the initial placing it on the fire. If it was roasted already and you're like reheating it, that doesn't smell the same. It's leftovers. Umechitza l'damim. There's also a division on the public altar of where the blood should be placed: below the line, above the line, and the upper part of the altar, the lower part. Richos yadayim raglayim, the hands need to be washed and the feet need to be washed. Aval azman hanais v'atam yeshavim bazeh bazeh. The allotted time that you have for each sacrifice, if it gets left over, and if someone is impure, that's equal by private altars and by public altars. Okay, yesterday we learned certain sacrifices that did not need to come into the temple. For example, a paraduma was burnt outside the temple, or the goat that was thrown off the cliff that was not brought to the temple. It was brought into the temple, but it was offered outside the temple because it was pushed off the cliff. Let's say someone burnt the paraduma not in the place where it was supposed to. He burnt it somewhere else. So because it was never supposed to be in the temple, so he's exempt from bringing a sacrifice outside the temple, even though it wasn't in the appropriate place. And the same was with the goat that was pushed off. If he sacrificed it somewhere outside the temple, because it was never supposed to be in the temple, he doesn't incur the punishment of bringing a sacrifice outside. Now the expression that it said, that it was burnt outside of the appropriate place, the paraduma, it says chutz migita. The Gemara says, "My chutz migita." What does it mean outside its ditch? Gita is like a ditch. Amar Rish Lakish. Rish Lakish says, "Chutz mi makam abadikla." Good morning. See, you have to tell Nachum that
he asked for you yesterday.
tell him that he's come to the class.
Yeah. It's your son, right? Yeah, he asked me for him yesterday.
Okay. I'll just have to wake up a little early. He'll be a little wiser, right? Healthy, wealthy, and wise.
Sure.
So, chutz mimakam abadakla. It means outside the place that was checked to be pure. You see, the paraduma, there was always a concern that maybe there was someone buried underneath, and they had to dig down and check to make sure that until they reached the bedrock, to make sure that there were no bodies there. So the place that the paraduma was done needed to be carefully checked. So if this was slaughtered outside that place.
It was outside the temple.
It was done outside the temple. Now we're saying, what does it mean? It was slaughtered outside the temple. We said that he doesn't include the punishment of doing this outside the temple because it was supposed to be outside the temple. But he took it and he did it even somewhere else outside the place where it was supposed to be outside the temple. He did it somewhere else. So what does it mean somewhere else? It's supposed to be outside the temple. It says it was done in a place that wasn't checked for that purity. They didn't check all the way down. What do you mean he did it somewhere else that wasn't checked? The whole Israel is checked from graves. Elam Rabbi Yechon, we're going to see later what they're discussing. Elam Rabbi Yechon, you know what his problem was? He slaughtered it within the walls. It's supposed to be outside the walls. He slaughtered it within the walls. The Gemara asks, where's it supposed to be slaughtered? You see, the temple was set up. This was the mount. The temple was here. And you could actually go down the mountain. On the mountain opposite, you were able to look directly over, opposite to the entrance, because the way the walls were, there was lower, and then it got higher and higher. So it's actually like relief, it was in stages. So you could actually look up. That entrance to the sanctuary was taller than the wall. So if you're on this side, you could look straight through, straight up to it. So it was supposed to be opposite the entrance. So Rabbi Yechanan says, what did the guy do wrong? He slaughtered it within the wall of Jerusalem. It was supposed to be out here. He slaughtered it within the wall. He says, why didn't he just say he slaughtered it not opposite the entrance, just when he moved over a little bit? We're trying to say that even though he slaughtered it in the wrong place, it doesn't have the punishment of slaughtering it outside the temple. And Ravada Barava says that if you do it in the wrong place, it's possible. So that's clear that he did it wrong, and nevertheless we would say that he doesn't include the punishment of slaughtering a sacrifice outside the temple, because it's not supposed to be. Because we have a juxtaposition of these two words. It says that he will slaughter it, and he will sprinkle the blood. Ma hazasa k'neged besach. Just like the sprinkling of the blood is supposed to be opposite the entrance, which was directly corresponding on the next mountain over to the entrance. Also the slaughtering, which that's what we're dealing with here, the slaughtering of it needs to be opposite the entrance. And this person did it on the side. Why didn't Rabbi Yechanan say that? If you'll say the lay makish, that Rabbi Yechanan doesn't do that juxtaposition, he doesn't compare the two. But it was taught. Okay, now the following Gemara, some versions have it, some don't. It doesn't make a difference. We could read it. It's stated. You see in the parentheses, Shachta shlei keneged Pesach was slaughtered, not corresponding to the entrance. Rabbi Yechanan B'sula, v'shachat v'hiza. What we're seeing is that Rabbi Yechanan does have the juxtaposition. He says it's slaughtered and it's sprinkled. He puts those two words from the verse together. It says, and it will be sprinkled opposite the entrance. But the beginning of the verse says it will be slaughtered. So just like sprinkling needs to be opposite the entrance, so too the slaughtering needs to be opposite the entrance, because it's in the same verse.
But we sprinkled the walls?
The blood of the paraduma was sprinkled.
Into the walls?
No, it was too far away, towards. It says that Elazar the priest will take from his blood in his finger, and he will sprinkle it corresponding to the entrance of the tent of meeting 7 times. So Rabbi Yechanan learns that it needs to be slaughtered opposite the tent of meeting. So this could have been something that Rabbi Yechanan could have taught us, that even though you didn't slaughter it opposite the tent of meeting, nevertheless you don't include the punishment of slaughtering it outside the temple. Why does he have to give us the case that you slaughter it within the walls, like something really off? Could have even something of less significance. Rish Lakish says if you slaughter it not corresponding to the walls, it's still valid. Al michutz lamachane. It says to slaughter. It doesn't say that you slaughter it opposite the end of meaning. It was also stated. It was burnt, not corresponding to the entrance. Rabbi Yochanan number Psula. Rabbi Yochanan says it's invalid. Rabbi Shi Amar Ksheira. Rabbi Shi says it's valid. The Gemara explains. Rabbi Yochanan number Psula. Rabbi Yochanan says it's invalid if it was burnt, not corresponding. V'saraf v'hisa. It says it will be burnt, and he will burn it. And it says right before that in the verse, he will sprinkle it. And the sprinkling needs to be corresponding to the entrance. So the burning also needs to be corresponding to the entrance. Rabbi Shiyamar, there's two statements. One is the slaughtering, one is the burning of it. Whatever the case is, we're seeing that Rabbi Yochanan uses the words in the verse as a juxtaposition. The fact that those two words are in the verse, that tells me that it needs to be done corresponding to the entrance. Because the sprinkling needs to be, also the other parts of it need to be opposite the entrance. Rabbi Shia says, Ksheira, al pirshi yisrei, on its innards, on its waist that's inside it should be burnt. Makam sheprecious lamisa. What this means is that the place where it actually dies, because it's possible that the nerves are still like the blood is pulsating, or the nerves are still working even after the slaughtering of it. So when does it actually die? I guess when the nerves stop. So that could be in a different place, because it could be it moves over. So some taste reifasa over there, that's where it's burnt. So Rabbi Shia says, you see that it doesn't need to be burnt opposite the tent of meeting, because it could be it died somewhere else, and you would burn it right wherever it died. So Rabbi Shia says that that lining up to opposite the entrance is not necessary. It's not necessarily mandatory. Rabbi Yochanan says it is mandatory. So our question is, why didn't Rabbi Yochanan say that when the person slaughters the sacrifice, slaughters the red heifer, the paradum, in the wrong place, why didn't he just say that he moved it over a drop? Why do you have to say that you did it within the walls of Jerusalem, which is also a problem? So Amri, they responded, they answered this, Loimi Boy Kamar. What Rabbi Yochanan meant was not only Loimi Boy Chutz L'chaima, not only if it was done outside the walls, that it's very distant from being opposite the holy place. But even if it's within the wall, which that's much closer to the holy place, and over there I could have thought I could have thought that it's valid. Kamash Balan, Rabbi Yochanan's telling me that it's invalid. But even though it's invalid, when it's slaughtered there, it's not considered that it was slaughtered outside a sacrifice that's brought outside the temple, because it was never supposed to be brought outside the temple. But what we're seeing is that Rabbi Yochanan holds that even if it's so close, he brought it closer, it's still invalid. That's what we're learning. Amar Mar. The master said, when we use the term Amar Mar, we're going back to explain something that was mentioned before. Say the master said, that means we're going to revisit something that was mentioned, but mentioned in passing. Amalei Rabbi Yochanan said, but the whole land of Israel is examined from impurity. Rish Lakish says that it was offered in a place that wasn't examined from impurity. Rabbi Yochanan says the whole Israel was examined. But what is the discussion here between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish? Marsa v'yarad ma'abel Eretz Yisrael. One opinion says that the flood in the days of Noach came to the land of Israel as well. Marsa v'lo yarad. The other opinion holds that the flood did not come to the land of Israel. What is this referring to? It's assumed that there would be a lot of dead bodies after the flood. So if the flood was in the land of Israel, that would mean that there would be dead bodies there, and the whole earth needed to be examined from the dead bodies, the bones and fossils that would be there from the flood. So Rish Lakish says the flood was in the land of Israel. So you have to examine every spot before you do the paraduma on it. You might be standing over a grave. Rabbi Yochanan says there was no flood in the land of Israel. The flood was everywhere else. The land of Israel was never flooded. So therefore the bones were never there. So there's no problem. Everything was examined. The graves are graves, and non-graves are there's nothing there. It was never. No one was ever buried there. Rab Nachman bar Yitzchak Kshnei Mikra Echad Darshu. Rab Nachman bar Yitzchak says that they both learn this from the same verse. The verse is in Ezekiel. Ben Adam Amarla, At Eretz Loi Mitahirahi, Loi Gushama B'Yemzam. Son of man, say to her, you land are not pure. It did not rain on the day of anger. Rabbi Yochanan Savar, Rabbi Yochanan says, his opinion is, Atmoi Metamakra. The pasuk is saying in astonishment, or in question. Eretz Yisrael, Milay Mitzahirat. Israel, are you not pure? Klum Yard Alecha Geshama B'Yemzam. Did it rain on you in the day of anger? Which means, did the flood go on you? Are you not pure? It's in the no in there is in question form. Are you not? Which means, of course, you are pure. Rish Lakish Savar Kapashte. Rish Lakish says no. You don't read it in question form. Eretz Loi Mitzahirat. Are you not? You read it like this: Eretz Loi Mitzahirat. You are not pure. Mila Yardu Alecha Geshamim B'Yemzam. Did it not rain on you in the day of anger? That means, did you not have the flood? It's talking to the land of Israel, and therefore all the bodies were ended up there. So you're not pure. It's said without a question form. They said the Chazan said that the rabbi is a ganav. The rabbi is a thief. So they told the Chazan he has to apologize. So he gets up. He says, the rabbi is not a thief. So they said, no, that's not a good apology. So why not? He said because you didn't sing it the right way. He said, I'm the Chazan. You're telling me how to sing. So the question is how you read the verse. Yeah. Is it you are not or you are not? Okay. So what are we saying over here? That Rish Lakish and Rabbi Yochanan are discussing if the flood was in the land of Israel. What's the difference if the flood was there? The difference is, are there bodies that are buried all over the land of Israel that no one knows about? If that would be the case, according to Rish Lakish, you have to examine all the way down to the bedrock to make sure that there was nothing there before the paraduma was performed, was burnt, and all of that was done there. However, Rabbi Yochanan says that there was no flood there, so Israel is already examined. Okay. Eis Rish Lakish to Rabbi Yochanan. Rish Lakish has a question to Rabbi Yochanan. Chatzeir Yisayim B'Yerushalayim. There were courtyards in Israel, Benuyas ala Sela, that are built on the rock. B'tachtem cholol, and beneath them is a hollow, mipnei keverat tohaim, because of a possible grave that's buried there in the tohaim, in the abyss, in the depth. What this means is like this: that impurity travels through solid. If it's all solid, impurity travels through it. Insulation for impurity is when there's a hollow. That actually stops the impurity from going up, similar to insulation that we do in the winter, and in the colder places. They have two glass, and it's the air in between that does the insulation. It's not the thicker things. It doesn't even matter probably. It's the space in between that's the. So when it comes to impurity, it's the same thing. So what they would do is they needed a place that was pure, and they wouldn't be able to check all the way down. So what they would do is they would build a sort of a platform, rock, over the ground. So it's like a bridge, sort of. And that way, if there was a grave that was down there, that would be insulation. Anyone on top would be pure. So what would they do then? Listen to this. Meviim nashim ubaris. They would bring pregnant women, the yoldus, and they would give birth on this area. Umagadli sham b'neiim lepara, and then they would raise their son over there to be able to draw the water to mix with the paraduma. So we wanted to be sure that this child was pure, that never came in contact with a dead body. So right from birth, he would be able to, they would have to wait until he would grow, I don't know, till 2 or 3 years old, till he can actually get the water. And Mivim Shvarim, and then they would bring oxen, Baal Gabeim Dalsis, and they would put doors on top of the oxen. They were spread out flat. The Tinoikus Yeshvan Aleh, and the children would sit on top of those doors. That was also a protection from any impurity that was in the ground. The Kaisis Shalevan Biyadam, and they would have stone cups in their hands, because stone doesn't become tameh. It was a stone receptacle. Umalu, they would fill it up, Yashvu and Kaiman, and they would sit in their place. And so what are we seeing? Why did they have to do this? It must be that there were dead bodies in the land of Israel that were buried in the ground, or else this whole thing is extra. Now, I need to point out, let's go a drop further. Amar Rav Huna Breder Rav Yeshua, Rav Huna Breder Rav Yeshua answers for Rabbi Yochanan that says that there was no flood in the land of Israel. So my loss of Bapara. This was just an extra thing that they did for the Paraduma. It wasn't really a law that they had to do this. Why did they have to do this extra thing? What happened was there was an argument between the Sadducees and the rabbis and the Pharisees. The Sadducees held that the person needed to be totally pure in order to do the Paraduma. The rabbis held they didn't need to be totally pure. Even if once he went to the mikveh, even if he didn't wait for nightfall, it was good enough. So they would actually use people that went to the mikveh from impurity, from the body or whatever impurity, and specifically in spite, just to show that that we don't agree with the way the Sadducees rule, and we have our own tradition. We don't need their stringencies. However, because they had that leniency, that they would use someone that was still slightly impure because he didn't wait for nightfall. Usually after the mikveh, you wait for nightfall to become totally pure. They made a lot of other stringencies to make sure that no one took this leniently. Otherwise, people may say, "Oh yeah, it's no problem. You can do." Once you show a little loophole, then everyone says, "Oh yeah, it's not a problem. There's an Erev, I can turn on the light on Shabbos." Think of all. So they had these other stringencies. What we're saying here is that it wasn't necessary to do this boards with people being born on. It wasn't necessary. It was just a stringency in order because they had this leniency to prove that the Sadducees were incorrect. So they had this strictness. Now Rabbi Yochanan asked Rish Lakish back.